LaKayla, thank you for sharing your story. Just one person having experienced that is certainly enough. But LaKayla is certainly no anomaly, as this is an all too familiar story for too many people. But thank you for sharing what was deeply personal. It's not easy to do what you just did. And so we thank you. And of course, it's always good to stand alongside my partners in good trouble in doing the work of righting wrongs and centering the humanity of people and our efforts around consumer protection and social justice and so many other issues. Today, we're all here to call on President Biden to do right by the movement that elected him and to use his executive authority to cancel $50,000 in federal student loan debt. We find ourselves in a moment of crises, a public health and economic crises, which has ravaged communities in the Massachusetts 7th and all across our Commonwealth, a crisis of racial injustice and white supremacy, which continues to inflict hurt and harm and trauma on Black, Brown, AAPI, and Indigenous folks nationwide, and a growing student debt crisis which disproportionately impacts Black and Brown borrowers. So what this moment calls for is that we are bold and that we are intentional in our policymaking at every level of government to confront these overlapping crises head on and to set ourselves on a pathway to a just and equitable recovery. Now, make no mistake, very often on the issue of student debt, there has only been one narrative that people have heard. And that narrative does a deep disservice and injustice to the totality of burden and hurt and the psychological toll and impact of this debt. The student debt crisis has always been a racial and economic justice issue. But for too long, that narrative has excluded Black and Latinx communities when in fact, the student debt crisis has exacerbated deeply entrenched racial and economic inequities in our nation. Because of discriminatory policies like redlining, Black families were denied the ability to build generational wealth. 85% of Black students feel, or not even feel, it is the reality that they have no choice but to take out student loans. And they are 5 times more likely to default than their counterparts, than their other peers. So these disparities, they didn't just magically appear. They are the direct result of generations of precise, intentional policy violence, is how I would characterize it, which has systemically denied Black and Latinx families the opportunity to build wealth and forced our families to take on higher rates of student debt for the chance at the same degree as our white counterparts. We have got to take bold action to address these inequities and disparities in our country, and we must use every tool available to provide our communities with the critical relief they so desperately need and deserve. Canceling student debt by executive action is one of the most effective ways President Biden can provide sweeping relief to millions of families, help reduce the racial wealth gap, and begin to build the groundwork for an equitable and just long-term recovery. So, if President Biden is serious about closing the racial wealth gap, if President Biden seeks to build back better, then he must use his executive authority to issue broad-based, across-the-board student debt cancellation. We cannot afford to make the same mistakes of the past. During the 2008 financial crisis, lawmakers bailed out Wall Street and abandoned Black and Brown communities who lost everything, and many have yet to recover. So as we work to ensure an equitable recovery to the current crisis, we can't simply tinker around the edges. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts alone, there are over 855,000 student borrowers, and they owe a total of $33.3 billion in student loan debt. Their average student loan balance is nearly $39,000. So that means in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic, which has wrought unprecedented economic hardship, food insecurity, unemployment, families on the precipice of eviction, that people are still being expected to pay student loan debt that is the equivalent of a mortgage in the midst of a global pandemic, when they're having to fight and do every little thing just to remain safely housed in the midst of a global pandemic. I represent the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District. This is a vibrant, diverse, dynamic district, and it is one of the most unequal in our country. So while student debt cancellation would help communities nationwide, it would have an especially profound and transformative impact here in our Commonwealth. As lawmakers, we have a responsibility to ensure that our long-term recovery efforts leave no community behind. And that's why we're all here today. This is about investing in the people. That's what student debt cancellation is. It's good economic policy. It's an investment in the people, particularly Black and brown families. And that's why Senator Warren and I, in partnership with Senate Majority Leader Schumer and our other colleagues, reintroduced our resolution in Congress that calls on President Biden to cancel up to $50,000 in student loan debt and lays out a pathway for him to do so. Our resolution has a record level of support across both chambers of Congress and is supported by over 325 grassroots organizations. The coalition behind student debt cancellation is the very same coalition that elected Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And it is a powerful coalition. With the stroke of a pen, President Biden can provide direct relief to tens of millions of families across the country, help close the racial wealth gap, and set our nation on a path to a long-term, equitable recovery. He can and must use this authority. Before I close, I'd like to thank once again Attorney General Healy for her partnership on this and so many other issues, for generously hosting us all here this afternoon. And again, I thank her for her leadership and all that she has done on the state level to ensure that students are not ripped off by predatory for-profit colleges and get the critical relief that they deserve. And now I'd like to introduce, again, my partner in good trouble, who speaks my love language, which is policy, our Senator Elizabeth Warren. Maybe we should have some transition music.
That's right.
Bear
That's
with
right.
me here.
There's a little dance.
Got to get this mask over my hoops. Bear with me. Okay.
I noticed you managed.
I
Very
know
nice.
it's become skilled now. I'm skilled.
Very nice.
Okay.
I'm
Thank you.
good.
Right.
I'm good.